My ex admitted she was cheating on me the entire time we were together, lost all her friends, and is now begging for another chance, says he still feels like the love of my life. Do I risk my heart again or walk away forever? Nina and I met in college, and if I'm being brutally honest with myself, I didn't treat her the way she deserved back then. I was immature, selfish, and careless with her feelings. We slept together once, and I didn't call afterward. I flirted with her while I was already in another relationship, which was messy and unfair to everyone involved. I did at least confess that to my then partner immediately, but that doesn't erase the fact that I had crossed a boundary and put Nina in a terrible position. Looking back, I think I always knew I was drawn to her in a way that went deeper than just casual attraction, but instead of being honest or brave about that, I handled everything in the worst possible way. Years later, after a lot of growing up and soul-searching, I apologized to Nina. I owned how poorly I treated her, and though she accepted my apology, those past mistakes remain the backdrop for everything that has happened since. The story that really matters here, the one I'm still turning over in my mind, began after college. Nina had settled in a city near mine. She was building her life, her career, her network of friends, and I was drifting a little newly single after the end of my last relationship. Too soon, probably, I reached out to her. I should have given myself more time to heal, to process, to figure out what I actually wanted. But instead, I did what felt easy and familiar. I reached for her. To my surprise, she responded warmly. We began talking again. Early on, she told me that she was seeing someone but that we could still be friends. I didn't want to cross lines or push her into anything uncomfortable, so I asked about him. She explained that things were on their last legs with this guy, that it was more of a slow fizzle than an actual ongoing relationship. I held on to that, maybe too tightly, as permission to keep the door open. As we texted, our conversations gradually turned flirtatious. I would send her something lighthearted and teasing, and she'd respond in kind. A couple weeks into this, I asked her directly where things stood with the guy she was seeing. Her answer was, in her words, that it would be clearly inappropriate to get back together with him when there's clearly something going on here with us. That sentence has played on a loop in my head ever since, because in that moment I realized she saw what I felt. There was something happening between us. Something worth acknowledging. Months passed, and in those months we built something that, at least from my perspective, felt extraordinary. I visited her in her city, and she came to mine on occasion. We had dates that weren't just good. They were the kind of experiences you want to bottle and preserve forever. The kind of dates you look back on and think, that was when life felt technicolor. Conversations that didn't drag or skim the surface, but dove deep, winding through art, philosophy, random internet memes, family histories, and all the little quirks of daily life. For me, she wasn't just another person I happened to like. Nina was the best conversation partner I've ever had. She shared so many of my passions, from obscure music genres to nerdy debates about books to the thrill of discovering a new cafe and ordering something off-menu just to see what happens. She had this way of making the ordinary feel like an adventure. We would walk through the city streets, and it felt like we were in our own little world. And it wasn't just compatibility. It was admiration. She is exceptionally smart, almost intimidatingly so, but without ever making you feel small. She carried herself with this effortless confidence, and yet she was incredibly kind, never dismissive or condescending. She had an expansive social circle that adored her, and I would watch her navigate it with ease, always making time for everyone, always shining. The truth is, she is the kind of person who feels out of reach for someone like me. I've always been the nerdy type, bookish, a little awkward, slow to warm up in social settings. Nina, on the other hand, seemed to light up every room she entered. That she would even give me the time of day, let alone go on these incredible dates with me, felt surreal. It felt like winning some lottery I hadn't even known I'd entered. That's why, when I think about what we had, I can't help but believe that if she and I don't end up back together, I will never meet anyone like her again. Maybe that's unhealthy, maybe that's me clinging too tightly to a fantasy, but it feels true. She isn't just another person I dated. She's the standard against which everyone else now seems dull, mismatched, or flat. The irony is that in being with her again, even in that undefined, tentative way, I grew. She pushed me out of my comfort zone in ways that were both exhilarating and terrifying. She showed me new ways of living, of being present, of saying yes instead of defaulting to no. She made me braver. I learned things about myself that I hadn't realized were even there to learn. And for that, I'll always be grateful, no matter how things ultimately turn out. Still, Despite all the closeness, despite the late-night calls and the adventures in each other's cities, Nina and I were not officially boyfriend and girlfriend. That was her line, not mine. She told me, with a kind of quiet firmness, that she still didn't fully trust me after everything I'd messed up in college. She couldn't just erase the ways I had treated her back then. The flakiness, the selfishness, the way I'd put her in positions that hurt. She wanted to be sure, beyond doubt, that she could trust me before she allowed herself to commit. And so we stayed in this sort of limbo. We weren't nothing, God, it didn't feel like nothing. But we weren't together, either. We were in this holding pattern where everything felt like it was building toward something, but that something never arrived. For a while it was okay. We were having so much fun that I could forget the labels. But underneath it all, the uncertainty gnawed at me. Was this going somewhere? Was I proving myself? Or was I just keeping her company until she made a different choice? At one point, the anxiety got the better of me. Instead of talking to her honestly about how the limbo was eating me up inside, I pulled the plug. I ended things. For a single day, it was over. That day was a disaster. I missed her immediately, regretted the rashness, and realized how badly I had handled it. I should have opened my mouth and told her what I was feeling, instead of taking unilateral action that blindsided her. We got back together after that, both of us shaken, both of us a little bruised, but still wanting each other. We promised to work on things, and in some ways, we did. The months that followed blurred into a rhythm of calls that stretched for hours every night. Sometimes 4, sometimes 6. We'd talk until one of us was falling asleep mid-sentence, then wake up to texts that picked up right where we left off. For 6 months, she was my world. Then the ground shifted. A friend of mine happened to be talking to a friend of Nina's ex-boyfriend. My name came up. Nina's name came up. And in that casual, second-hand way that feels like a grenade lobbed into your lap, my friend learned that the ex-boyfriend's friend believed Nina and the ex were still together. When I heard this, my stomach turned cold. I didn't want to believe it. But the seed was planted. I started digging. Not snooping through her phone or anything like that, but reaching out to mutual acquaintances, piecing together timelines, asking careful questions. The more I heard, the less sense things made. There were too many contradictions, too many details that didn't add up with what Nina had told me. Finally, I confronted her. My heart was pounding, my palms sweaty, but I needed to know. I laid out what I'd heard. She confessed, at least partially. She admitted that after our 24-hour breakup, she had started talking to him more again. She insisted they hadn't slept together, that it was just conversation, a kind of fallback to something familiar. I didn't know what to do with that. My chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out of me. We hung up with me saying it was over, that I couldn't keep doing this. But the more I sat with it, the more restless I became. There were too many loose threads, too many pieces that still didn't align. Later that night, I texted her. I laid out my doubts, all the ways her story didn't fit with the facts I'd gathered. When I woke up the next morning, there was a message waiting for me. A long one. The kind you scroll through slowly, because each new paragraph confirms something you don't want to be true. In that message, she confessed the full truth, or at least what I currently believe to be the full truth, that she and her ex had never actually broken up. That the entire time she and I had been together, she'd been cheating. Reading those words felt like my ribs were collapsing inward. I had suspected, yes, but to see it spelled out left no room for denial. She explained herself, as best she could. Their relationship, she said, had been fraught in all kinds of ways. Messy, complicated, maybe even unhealthy. She said she had felt an obligation to stay with him, some sense of responsibility to help him, even when her heart was no longer fully in it. Then, she said, I came back into her life. She fell in love with me, and suddenly, she was torn in 2 directions she didn't know how to reconcile. She told me she loved me, that she was sorry, that she hadn't wanted to hurt me, but she hadn't known how to choose. In the months after everything blew up, Nina and I barely spoke. The truth of what she had done, cheating on me the entire time we were together, hung between us like a thick fog I couldn't see through. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was betrayal at the deepest level. Still, silence didn't make it any easier. Every time I thought of her, it was like reopening a wound that hadn't even begun to scar. Through mutual friends and bits and pieces of what filtered back to me, I gathered that she was going through hell. She lost a lot of friends over what happened, people who had once been close to her but couldn't stomach the lies. She fell into depression. It shattered her sense of self in ways that almost scared me to think about. This person who had once been so vibrant, who seemed to radiate confidence and connection, was now struggling to piece herself back together. Months passed. Slowly, here and there, we started having occasional conversations again. They weren't about us. At least not at first. But inevitably, the subject came up. At one point she called me and, unprompted, told me all the reasons she loved me. She said she had realized, too late, that she'd never actually told me those things when it mattered. It wasn't about trying to win me back. At least, that's not how it came across. It was more like she was trying to give me something she knew she had withheld, almost as an act of apology. For a while, that was all there was. I forgave her in words, though I also told her, honestly, that I was still deeply hurt. I wanted her to know that I wasn't pretending the pain was gone just because I said the words, "I forgive you." Forgiveness, for me, was more about deciding not to let bitterness consume me than it was about letting her back into my life. We had a brief stretch where we chatted more regularly, but I eventually broke that off. It was too hard, too raw. Every conversation was like pressing on a bruise. And yet, somehow, we're here again. We're back in contact, and the possibility of working through things has resurfaced. This time, the logistics are even more complicated. We live even further apart now. It's not just an emotional gulf between us, but a physical one, measured in miles and time zones. Long distance isn't impossible, but it's another weight on a scale that's already unsteady. The thing is, Nina has tried very hard to atone. She hasn't been defensive. She hasn't minimized what she did. She owns it fully. She has made it clear that she regrets it and that she understands the gravity of the betrayal. And she's been through so much since then, traumas and losses that, while not excuses, at least shed light on why she made the choices she did. I don't think she's the same person who cheated on me. I do believe she's learned from it, that she's confronted parts of herself she used to avoid. And despite everything, I can't shake this truth. In nearly every other respect, she feels like the perfect person for me. Our conversations, our shared passions, the way she makes me feel alive and understood. It's unlike anything I've experienced with anyone else. Yesterday, we had one of the longest phone calls of our lives. We spent hours talking about the idea of getting back together. I told her, as honestly as I could, that I needed to do more work on my own before there would be space for us to work on it together. The hurt is still there, even if muted, even if dulled by time. She listened, but then she also spent an hour painting this picture of a future together. How perfect we are for each other, how much sense it makes, how we could spend our lives side by side. And the scary thing is, it didn't sound like fantasy. It sounded possible. But beneath all that possibility, I'm terrified. First, I'm scared she could cheat again. She swears up and down that she wouldn't, and when I listen to the conviction in her voice, I almost believe her completely. Almost. Second, I worry about my friends. They watched me go through this. They saw how broken I was when I found out. They don't like her because they know how much she hurt me, and I can't exactly blame them for that. Third, the practical reality. If we tried again, we'd be long distance for years. We'd have to navigate flights, time differences, missed calls, and all the little cracks that can form when you're living separate lives. So here I am, caught between two truths. On one hand, Nina feels irreplaceable. The connection we have is rare, maybe once in a lifetime rare. On the other hand, she's the person who betrayed me in the deepest way possible, and choosing her again feels like gambling with my own heart. I don't know if getting back together is an act of courage or an act of self-sabotage. I don't know if believing in her growth is wisdom or delusion. What I do know is that I still love her, and that makes everything infinitely harder. If anyone has advice, any clarity from the outside looking in, about whether trying again is remotely a good idea, I'd welcome it. Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like I'm standing at the edge of something that could either be the best decision of my life or the worst mistake I'll ever make.